Good evening. Tonight, we gather for two purposes that are in many ways deeply connected. We gather for our second and final round of student inductions into the Cum Laude Society, a recognition of academic excellence, intellectual curiosity, and a sustained commitment to learning. And we come together to share a meal prepared this afternoon by as many as 20 of our students who have participated in our Gould chapter of Lasagna Love, a neighbor-to-neighbor movement where we provide home-cooked lasagna prepared with care to individuals and families in need throughout our region. This is part of a broader national and international effort that began during COVID and has now served millions through this simple act of care, connection, and dignity. Every lasagna prepared today, whether meat, vegetarian, or vegan, reflects something more than a recipe. It reflects attention, it reflects intention, and it reflects a willingness to recognize others in our community, often people we may never meet. So tonight's about scholarship, and it's also about care. But more than that, it's about the relationship between the two. So I want to begin with the music you heard as you were taking your seats this evening. For many of you, that may have been your first time hearing We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel. Am I right? For me, the song is representative of something hidden, something that goes unsaid and unseen, and points to something unsettling in my own assumptions and in my experience as an American. I was a senior in college when this song came out in 1989, and for a long time, I thought of it as a kind of history lesson. The song moves rapidly through 40 years of global events, 119 in all. It's fast, almost breathless, and it gave me the sense that I was encountering history. But I've come to recognize that there's something else happening in this song. It lists events, but does not ask us to sit with them or understand them. And in the end, it offers a kind of absolution, a free pass for how we act in the world. We didn't start the fire. Over time, I've come to hear that refrain differently. I began to wonder who the we was. And I came to hear it, at least in part, as us, as Americans. Not only as observers of history, but as people who had come to understand our version of history as the version. Something authoritative, something complete. And in that, there's perhaps a subtle distancing, not only from responsibility, but from the possibility that other histories, other perspectives might be equally real and equally necessary. We didn't start the fire. I've come to realize that those assumptions don't simply disappear. I keep noticing them. And to this day, I have to keep pushing back against them in my own life. I grew up in suburban Massachusetts in a Jewish family. I attended Hebrew school and Sunday school 3 times a week, where I was taught by Holocaust survivors. I grew up surrounded by stories of loss, displacement, and vigilance. There was a deep sense that identity mattered and that it needed to be protected. In my household, with my parents, we lived secular lives, but my grandparents' generation was more cautious, and in many ways, much more insular. Their social lives were largely focused within the Jewish community. There was caution about the outside world, not hostility per se, but a measure of distance. The message, as I experienced it from the older generation, was not to engage broadly with the world, but to navigate it carefully. At the same time, my goals in life were largely local and quite personal. I wanted to make the team, to win the championship, to get into the right school. There was very little sense that the world extended far beyond that. In school, we didn't engage deeply with global perspectives, and the implicit message was simple: America is the world. And so I moved through my early life with a sense that I understood things, when in fact, I understood only a small part of a much larger reality. That all began to change when I lived abroad. I think back to my junior year of high school in Rennes, France. One moment in particular stands out to me. I was sitting at a kitchen table, sharing dinner with a friend of my host family who saw the world very differently than I did. In the midst of a rather animated conversation, as most of my conversations tend to be, even now, I said something I thought was completely reasonable. It wasn't met with disagreement, but with a pause. And then he said simply, "That's not how we see it." It was a small moment, but it really unsettled me because it revealed something I had not yet fully understood. That what I thought of as neutral, as objective, as simply the way things are, was shaped by my own experience, by my upbringing, my education, and the stories I had inherited. And yet there were other ways of seeing, other ways that are equally real, equally grounded, and equally valid. During 4 Point, we had the privilege of hosting author and historian Colin Woodard here on campus in partnership with the Bethel Historical Society as part of the lead up to Bethel's celebration of the 250th anniversary of our country's founding. In his work, Woodard describes the United States not as a unified culture, but as a constellation of different regions, each with its own history, its own values, and its own understanding of what it means to belong. I had the opportunity to speak with him, and I asked him a question that had been on my mind. Is it possible to create a shared story that binds us all together? I was thinking, in part, of French historian Ernest Renan, who argued that nations are shaped not only by what we remember, but also by what we choose to forget. Renan suggested that shared narratives, even when not fully grounded in truth, could serve to unify a people. And that idea has always troubled me, because a narrative not grounded in truth risks becoming something else, something that distorts, something constructed, something that asks people to accept a version of reality shaped just for them. Woodard's response was sobering, and it really took me aback. He suggested that the issue is not whether we create narratives, even fictitious ones. We always do. The issue is that we may not currently have a compelling, unifying narrative strong enough to counter more exclusionary visions of who we are. And I've been sitting with that ever since because it raises a deeper question for me. Not simply, what is our story, but who is shaping it and to what end? Because if our sense of ourselves is being constructed for us rather than by us, then something essential is at stake. Our agency, our ability to see clearly, our ability to question and to determine our place within that story. In a recent 10th grade history class, we arrived at a simple but powerful idea. To strip someone of their ability to determine their own narrative is a form of profound harm. So I find myself holding two tensions at once: the recognition that shared narratives matter, and the conviction that they must be grounded in honesty, transparency, in a willingness to confront complexity rather than to avoid it. I've come increasingly to see this tension in many places, in the ways immigrant communities are often encouraged to assimilate by setting aside parts of themselves. Many of our own immigrant grandparents, parents, and neighbors have been told to wipe the slate clean, that the price of entrance to our country is to forget the past, totally and completely. When my wife became an American citizen in 2017, it was a meaningful and hard-earned moment. And yet, part of the message she heard that day was about assimilation, about folding oneself into the fabric of American life. And I remember feeling that something was missing. There was little space for the journey that brought her here. There was little acknowledgement of what she carried with her, and little recognition that becoming American might also expand what America is. It was as if the price of entrance into this American identity was to forget the past, to simplify, to leave behind complexity in the interest of belonging. Journalist and editor Susie Hansen calls this cultural amnesia. And this act of forgetting, it has real consequences. It creates dislocation, a loss of historical depth, and a loss of continuity. Without inherited narratives, we're left unmoored. There's precious little framework through which we can understand others. And in that absence, something else takes hold. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie calls it the danger of a single story. Not that stories are untrue, but that they are incomplete. And when one narrative stands in for all others, it does more than simplify. It creates a quiet hierarchy, a sense that one way of seeing is central and others are peripheral. Over time, that single story begins to feel like truth itself. Hansen suggests that what we call American exceptionalism is not simply a belief in national uniqueness, but that it's often the unconscious assumption that Americans themselves are more knowing, more reasonable, more correct in their understanding of the world. Pushed even further, it's easy to see how this belief can become so complete, so embedded, that it shapes not only how we see others, but whether we are capable of seeing them at all. In my mind, what is most striking is not that this exists, but that it can remain invisible to those of us who hold it. James Baldwin understood this deeply. In Nobody Knows My Name, he wrote that American ignorance is not simply a lack of knowledge. It's a condition in which people believe they understand the world because they've been told that they do, because they can read, because they've been educated, because they've been given a version of reality that feels complete. And that kind of certainty is difficult to challenge because it resists revision. Baldwin suggests that what is required is not simply more knowledge, but a radical revision of identity. A willingness to question how we have come to know what we think we know. And it's here that I think of Karan Desai, who reminds us in The Inheritance of Loss that there is never only one narrative, and that no story belongs entirely to us. That realization can be unsettling, but it's also liberating because it allows us to move beyond the confines of a single perspective, to recognize that our understanding is partial, our experience situated, and that our identity is not diminished by encountering others, but rather deepened by it. And perhaps, as she suggests, we're not asked to hold the whole story, but to live responsibly within the part of it that we can see. And this is where scholarship matters. At its best, scholarship is not the accumulation of knowledge, but rather the cultivation of a critical spirit. It's a willingness to question what feels obvious, to examine where our ideas come from, and to sit with complexity rather than resolve it too quickly. It asks us not only to learn about the world, but to examine where our ideas come from. But to examine the lens through which we see it. To recognize that our understanding is shaped by history, by culture, and by the stories we've been told, and by the ones we've not yet heard. And then we begin, slowly, and sometimes uncomfortably, to revise that understanding. This isn't easy work. It requires humility. It requires patience. It requires, as James Baldwin reminds us, a willingness to let go of certainty and to undergo a revision of identity. And it's precisely the work that defines the students we honor tonight. They've demonstrated excellence, not only in performance, but in thought. They've engaged with difficult questions, and they've wrestled with ideas that are not easily resolved. These students have remained open in the face of complexity. They've demonstrated justice, not as abstraction, but as a way of seeing, as a commitment to understanding others on their own terms, to recognizing perspectives beyond their own, into resisting the ease of a single story. And they've demonstrated honor, not as recognition or a status, but a way of being in the world. They've demonstrated this through their integrity and curiosity, through their willingness to continue learning, even when the answers are not clear. Because ultimately, scholarship is not about arriving. It's about remaining open and recognizing that knowledge carries certain obligations. Among them, an obligation to see more clearly, to listen more carefully, and perhaps most importantly, to act. When our students gathered this afternoon to cook for Lasagna Love, they were doing something simple, yet something profound. They were preparing the meals that you're about to share. Meals just like those that we deliver to members of our community. It's important to recognize that this is not too different from what we've been talking about. It's an expression of scholarship because what begins as an act of service becomes something more. Nearly every recipient of a meal reports being inspired to pay that act forward. And so a single act becomes a chain of actions, a widening circle of care. This represents a network of human connection that extends beyond intention. It becomes a lived alternative to the kinds of narratives that we've been discussing. It's not imposed, it's not constructed from above, and it's not dependent on forgetting. But rather, it's built through attention, encounter, and the recognition of a shared humanity. This is how agency is restored, through the choice to see another person and to respond. It's fitting that later this month, on April 28th, we mark National Pay It Forward Day, because what we are doing here tonight is not symbolic, it's participatory. And this brings us to the purpose of the Cum Laude Society: excellence, justice, and honor. Not as abstractions, and not as ideals to be defined again this evening, but as qualities that have already been lived. Lived in the questions these students have been willing to ask, in their openness to being changed by what they encounter, and in the seriousness with which they have taken both their learning and their responsibilities to others. This recognition is not a culmination. It's a marker, a recognition of a way of moving through the world that does not settle for easy answers, that resists the comfort of a single story, and that remains attentive to the presence and the dignity of others. These qualities and values are what we honor here tonight. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Clark to join me as we formally welcome our newest members and recognize their achievements. It's now my great privilege to present the following students with their certificates of membership in the Cum Laude Society. Alex Legel. Bryn Elizabeth Newsom. Mateo Viniegra Ocampo. Owen Martin Sullivan. And Lauren Elizabeth Vigneault. So please join me once again in congratulating our newest members of the Cum Laude Society. Pictures, and for friends, family, advisors, faculty, we'll have a reception upstairs in upstairs overlay. Congratulations. So this evening, we also have the opportunity to recognize 2 additional members of the senior class for their academic distinction. To do so, I would like to invite Mr. Kamilewicz to come forward and to announce this year's Valedictorian and Salutatorian.
Many thanks, Adam. We have decided to move this ahead. So what I will announce first, is this good? What I will announce first is the salutatorian and then the valedictorian. I'm going to ask them to stand and be recognized. So our 2026 salutatorian is Bryn Newsom. And can I get a drum roll? Our 2026 valedictorian is Ella Wilder.
Around to excuse tables and enjoy the lasagna.